From Theatrical Shenanigans, this is The Panel Presents with
Brent Alice.
David Lipshoot.
Jamie Ola.
Hello there, and welcome to the last episode of The Panel Presents. I hope you've enjoyed listening to my lovely chats with panellists over the last 18 months and will continue to enjoy Theatrical Shenanigans and the mini shenanigans seasons we have in the future. But for now, let's meet our final panellists, and for a little twist, this month we have 3 instead of 4. My first panellist is based in Wyoming, USA, and is the author of many full-length and one-act plays. He was a 2018 Play Bites winner for his 10-minute play Swipe Left, Swipe Right, and his 10-minute play The Concierge in the 2024 FMCT Festival. For his full-length plays, his piece Accidental Roommate was a runner-up in the Robert J. Pickering and J.R. Colbeck Award for Playwriting Excellence. And if all that wasn't enough, his one-act play for young audiences, Big Top Barry, was the audience winner in the 2024 Eclectic Full Contact Theatre Playground Festival in Chicago, Illinois. A man I greatly look forward to chatting to. Welcome, Brent Alice.
Glad to be here.
My second panellist is a playwright and educator from the mighty Midwest. She's a scholar of comedy and is dedicated to creating new experimental plays that inspire positive social change. She's the founder of the Chicago Playwrights Group, a writing workshop that supported over 60 theatre creatives. She was also the co-founder and artistic director of Grassroots Theatre Projects, and she served as a company member with Del Vivo and the Moving Dock Theatre Company. She's a passionate educator with a 17-year career empowering students of all ages to write and perform their own stories, so she will be right at home here. Welcome, Jamie Ola.
Thank you so much for having me.
My third and final panellist is a Chicago-based artist and community member of Helena Handbag Productions. His plays have been performed throughout the United States, in Canada, England and Australia. He's a Tannis Award winner for excellence in playwriting for Goy Vey with Spoonie Theatre, and several of his plays have also been published with Hoyer Publishing and Smith & Krause. And if all that wasn't enough, his full-length play Guilty Trips and Machegas will soon be published by Next Stage Press. Another very busy person. Welcome, David Lipschutz.
I think it's about time I was on this thing.
Okay, as always, we start with a question for everyone. Why do you think we need theatre? And we'll start with David.
I think we need theater because theater gives us an opportunity to get out of our headspace in the real world and go into this other universe that allows us to just like live in the moment of watching the work unfold. And so I think that's why we need theater, especially now with the real world getting more and more chaotic.
Jamie.
I think it's a primal thing. It's a primal need. We need to gather. We need to tell stories. We need to learn and grow and process in community. As someone who works a lot with young people, I think it's particularly important to expose young people to theater early. So that they can find ways to express themselves in new ways and to process the world around them. And we also need entertainment. We need to, enjoy ourselves, and we need to do that in the community of other people.
Absolutely. And lastly, Brent.
Yeah, I'll just piggyback off of Jamie there. I'm also somebody who works with theater for young audiences. And yeah, to start there, it's amazing to see what it does for kids being able to participate in theater and to view theater as well. Because when we put the shows on for, young audiences, it's always awesome to hear their reactions and to see their excitement over participating and getting to view it as well. So that's a great thing also. And yeah, I would agree. I mean, in one aspect, we're escapism, and we always need escapism, perhaps more now than ever. But it's also, a chance to, I think, work through some things in the forum, to challenge ourselves sometimes with theater. I love, plays like The Play That Goes Wrong, which is just silliness from, for 90 minutes to 2 hours. But I also occasionally like seeing theater that, provokes me and makes me think and challenges me, in my own perceptions. And so that's what I've always valued about theater as well.
Going back to David, theatres and theatre groups have different ways of deciding what productions they run in their season. But if you were in charge, what do you think is the best way to decide on a season, and what would you want to produce?
I think it has to be a collaborative effort. It can't just be one person who runs the theater company or the board. It should be a collaborative decision of everyone who's involved with the company, be it an ensemble, be it a company group of some sort. And because I think everyone has different perspectives, and the what I think some theater companies, they just have one person making these decisions, and not necessarily everyone's on board. And it's not even that they don't like particular plays that are selected. It's just there's a more broad viewpoint if you get more people involved to make the decision that, hey, this is feasible for us to do, or we would love to do this show. I think this is a great show. I don't think this is the right show for us or the right time for us to do this particular show. And so I think that's the main thing. If I was running a theater company, I would make sure that there was almost like a vote of the folks involved in order to make the decision on their upcoming season.
Yeah, I think it's when you are a playwright and you submit your play to theatres and you are rejected, it is very easy just to go, well, they're just mean. But then you kind of take a step back and you have to look at it from the production side of things, and you think, well, how possible is it to stage this piece? And because there are so many different factors involved. I mean, if you take certain topics, certain theatres can't produce them because of where they are geographically. Like they will get like a lot of negative press, I would say, of producing certain topics, especially in America with the way things are there at the moment.
What?
Oh, sorry, am I wrong? Is that not a thing?
No, you're not wrong at all.
I wouldn't say getting a rejection, I will think that the theater is mean. I'll think that they're very wrong, but I never think that there's like an emotion behind their decision whether or not to accept a play that I've written. But I do take it. I agree with what you say. I take it to account and consideration. Oh, there's a lot of like technical elements of this play, and maybe this theater can't. Sometimes theaters will say black box space, like minimal tech elements, and I won't submit a particular play that has a tech heavy script. But sometimes I'm feeling bold, and there's no tech limitations, and so I'm going to submit that I also know, like, hey, it would be a lot for them to do this particular play, and so I understand if that's a reason for them not selecting it.
One of the other things that I think, besides the technical requirements of a play, there's so many other factors that, obviously need to be taken into account when choosing a season. Like, I think one of the things that I love the most about the companies that I admire is that they're not just choosing for themselves, but they're meeting a need in their community, that they are really tapped into the audiences that they're serving, and they're not just serving their own artistic interests, but they're meeting a need within the community, which is, I think, all of our goal, right, is to bring in more audience than just our friends and our family members, especially if we're newer theater makers, or still, if people are still establishing themselves. Like, that's the goal. And I feel like a big part of that is thinking outside of the company to, like, who are we doing this work for, and what is its purpose, and how is it timely, so that it actually is going to engage people in a conversation and build our audience.
And again, it's a delicate balancing act between that and annoyingly what is going to bring in the money. Because speaking over here, it's why plays by Agatha Christie and Neil Simon and Alan Bennett are so popular, because they know they put the bums on the seats, and they will do them again and again and again. I've seen about 15 productions of Blithe Spirit in my lifetime.
Over here, it's Midsummer Night's Dream. I can't go there's not a season without a production of Midsummer going up somewhere.
It's most accessible. And here in the Grand Rapids area too, I mean, and you get it because some of our community theaters and regional theaters, like we just had one that did You Can't Take It With You. And I'm like, oh boy, nothing wrong with that play, but it's like, 90 years old. But I do appreciate the ones that at least are mixing in new work with the tried and true. I mean, because there's no argument. We got one here in town that's doing White Christmas right now. They're completely sold out with all their performances. So it's like, well, it's hard to argue with that. Or, for young theater, all the Disney stuff, don't get me started on that. But that's why I do, like the theaters that you understand you got to put butts in seats and you've got to, cover your expenses. But at the same time, while you're doing these tried and trues that will bring people in, Grand Rapids Civic did Clyde's Place, which is certainly not as well known, but was a great thing to put on, sandwiched in between, cats and, whatever else that they know has a name value to people. So that's what I would do. But I also understand the challenge of a brand new play attracting people to it versus the tried and true, unfortunately. So.
But you get a lot of that in UK sites at the minute where they'll do a big pantomime at Christmas, which they know will bring in the money, and they'll do a big Agatha Christie or a Neil Simon in the summer, and then in between they'll do like not necessarily a festival, but like an evening of short plays that are like there'll be 4 or 5 plays that are like 10 minutes long, and they don't cost a lot to produce. And you can do the way they have the audiences, at least in the site that I'm with, they have it in a kind of cafe style. So everyone's sat at a table, everyone can like bring drinks in, everyone can just sit and enjoy themselves rather than that kind of regimented sat in a row, being aware that you are in a theatre. And it brings in not as much money, but it brings people in, and people go, "Oh, I enjoyed that. I'm going to go and do that next year." And that's how you open the door for the lesser known, at least the lesser known short plays, because people have said, "Oh, I saw this last year and it was really, really good. I'm going to go back and see it again." So you're not relying, therefore, on a play that is well known.
There's quite a few Chicago theaters that have really followed that formula to great success, where they have found a holiday show or a Halloween show or a whatever show that they do every single year, and it helps finance the new work. And it's such a practical thing. It's something that people look forward to every year. So I can't fault them for that. I can only applaud them for finding a formula that works so that they can actually have a sustainable season year after year. So I think it's a model that allows them to take more risks. So I think that absolutely is something that is successful.
I'm a company member with Helena Handbag Productions in Chicago, which does queer camp shows, and we have 2 staples that we do that are more successful, so that we can take risks with other projects. And we do the Golden Girls, the Lost Episodes, which are just 4 drag performers playing the Golden Girls and the shenanigans that they get into. And then we're doing in December Rudolph the Red-Hosed Reindeer, which has been done, I think, at least a dozen times over the last 20 or so years. So, but that's a staple every holiday season, or nearly every holiday, so that we can do more risky stuff the rest of the year.
The thing is, it's easy to just think that if you were in charge and you got to say what was produced, you just want to choose your own stuff. But I think even looking at my catalogue of work now, I think, nah, you need something different. You need different voices of writers through a season, because otherwise it will get boring. And so the same issue I have with Agatha Christie being done year in, year out will be the same thing, but with my own voice, which is 100 times worse. But I think it comes down to, when you're looking at producing a season, you have to honestly question yourself as to, as Jamie said, what do my community want to see? Yes, there is a certain amount of ego bolstering when you are in charge, thinking, oh, I could do this play because I want to do it, even if it isn't your own. Just something that you've always wanted to do. As long as it's logistically feasible and you can honestly say that it's something that the community may enjoy, then it's no longer about ego, it's about what's good for the theatre. So, David, your final thought on producing?
I'm glad I'm not. I mean, as I said, I'm part of Helena Handbag. and I get a lot of opportunities working with them. But I also like that there's enough freedom that I can write my own plays and submit them elsewhere and have them performed elsewhere.
Jamie, with Stranger Things being one of the most recent shows taken to the stage, there are some who've come out against productions of this nature, stating TV belongs on TV and theatre belongs in theatre. What are your thoughts on this and adaptations of popular TV shows and film in general?
Oh, well, I mean, I'm always going to be in favor of anything that brings people to the theater. I'm never going to poo-poo on anything that gets people in the theater. And as far as adaptation is concerned, I think it's quite a double standard if theater folks say, well, TV belongs on TV, because we've been borrowing from other forms since the beginning of theater. It's what we do, right? We adapt novels, we adapt, Sunday in the Park with George is based on a painting, right? So I think that artists are always going to be borrowing and finding inspiration and source material elsewhere. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think the biggest thing is taking into account the limitations and the requirements of each medium when you do adapt something across mediums, just because a novel is coming to a story from a very specific perspective and with different conventions that just do not work in film or do not work on the stage. And so the story needs to be handled in a way that takes advantage of all of the things that theater does best, right? And so I think that if you're going to do that, there are ways to do it to enhance that art, and there are ways to adapt that diminish the art. As far as specifically Stranger Things, first of all, like, I understand why they're doing it. It's for money, right? It is Netflix getting more money and getting more mileage out of a very, very popular series. But I did look at online to do a little research, and my understanding is that it's a prequel to the television series. And I thought that was a very smart thing to do, just like Harry Potter on Broadway is a sequel to the books, so that you're taking the characters, you're taking the world that has been built, but you are specifically creating a brand new story that can then be put on stage and take advantage of everything that the stage has to offer. But I think that the issue I take with it, and I think anybody who creates new work, is that it is taking up atmosphere and space for new work, for risky things in favor of capitalism. And that's the issue, right? That anybody who creates new work has, I think, with the Disneyfication of Broadway and whatnot, is that there's only so many audience members, there are only so many theaters, there's only so many opportunities. And if it's being gobbled up by these mega corporations who are doing it solely for profit, then we're losing those opportunities to birth new work into the world. But I understand why. Like, I understand why. Like, it is a commercial enterprise, and money needs to be made. And despite all of that, like, it is giving actors and writers and producers and technicians work. And so I can only be supportive of that. But as a creator of new work, I want more space.
Yeah, it's so hard as well, because these are the big theatres, and they're going to require the big budget shows, the shows that are going to pull in hundreds of thousands of people. So you understand why they do it, but at the same time you're looking at it thinking, Mean Girls, really?
Right.
We've had Legally Blonde, we've had Back to the Future, we've had Moulin Rouge. Can you just not just leave a film from the 90s alone?
Right.
And I think also in some ways, like, I have a very strong reaction to the Back to the Future musical. I also know somebody who's touring it currently, so, like, way to go for her to have that job. It's like, I'm thrilled for her. But at the same time, that is such an iconic film that what are we gaining? Like, we are gaining no artistic benefit, in my opinion, like, from that musical. No, it is just a cash to grab, which to me is just like, it's very hard for me to get fully behind something like that.
I appreciate the way you started this answer, though, that you're like, I'm not going to poo-poo anything that is like getting people to the theater, because like I'm so used to the like only the focus on the latter half of how you answered with
Yeah.
like the cash grab and like why this now kind of thing. But I wanted to just point out that I appreciate that you're like it's art, like it's still art, and you're still employing people, and that people are having this opportunity to go to the theater and see something. So I appreciate it.
They're doing it in every medium. They're doing. I mean, we're getting adaptations of stuff in film and television too. That's just because it was a previous hit elsewhere. There just seems to be a distrust of audiences ponying up for something new these days. It's like they're so afraid that unless we have an existing IP, intellectual property or something of that nature, that people just won't go. And that's a little disheartening, but that seems to be where we are sometimes. So
I think sometimes people go and see things because they know it's going to be like the number of films I have seen a trailer for and gone, that looked ridiculous, and immediately followed that with, I want to go and see it because it looked ridiculous.
I like that of the example that you used for this question, Rachel, is
Mm.
that it was a horror
Mm.
show. And so I will set aside any concerns I have with adapting just anything to a musical, so it could be on Broadway for capitalistic purposes, if it's a horror theme.
Mm.
Like there's so little horror stage productions, and
Mm.
so uh, in fact, if I could just, I want to give a shout out to Chicago right now, and probably some playwrights who might have been on this podcast before, or who have written for you before. I saw a festival yesterday with Bump in the Night Theater in Chicago, where they just had 6 short horror plays. And the thing that I loved most, besides that they were horror themed, is that spoiler alert, none of them had a happy ending. And it was so jarring that I was like, oh, like you can do that. Like you can write something that doesn't have a happy ending.
But going back to what you said originally, Jamie, about the amount of, well, the setting of an individual piece and how well it can translate to the theatre, I don't think they'd ever be able to do that with Game of Thrones. There are too many places
It's
for
so
you to need
epic.
to be. It would need to be I mean, you're talking like concert hall by this point, the size theatre to be able to fit all those locations in, and then you lose the intimacy that you get with TV because they're able to bring you right into the faces of, certain characters or at certain moments, which you don't get in massive theatres. And that's why I like black box theatre when it comes to the thrillers or the gritty or something that requires your audience to hold your audience attention.
I think it's important to choose the right venue for the right
Mm.
story.
Oh yeah.
Because there are certain shows that just belong in a black box, that they do require that intimacy, and if you put them in a larger stage, you lose something, right? Um, and there are, spectaculars that need space to take them in as an audience member. So I think that's coming back to our conversation about season selection as well, right? Is what space do we have, and what stories are going to best serve that space?
Okay, Jamie, your final thought.
Oh, I just thank you for this conversation about this. I think it's a very nuanced question. I think that we definitely, there are benefits, there are drawbacks. I mean, it makes perfect sense. I think I would not be sad to write a production that made me a ton of money, right? Like we all want
right.
I want to make a living in the theater, and if this is the way that the industry is developing, I think, how can I work with that, right? This is something that is, I think, here to stay, and how can I make my art within this landscape, I think, is a challenge. and one that I don't necessarily have an answer to. I think all of us independent, playwrights that are creating new work, I think that's a struggle that we're dealing with right now, is how to create new work in this industry right now. So yeah, lots of more questions than answers, I think.
Brent, when looking at the topics and content theatre has had to have to shock audiences in the past, how do you believe it compares to theatre now, and where do you think creating theatre to shock stands as a creative tool?
Yeah, it's definitely an interesting topic, in terms of my own, knowledge. I mean, when you go all the way back to early theater with the Greek tragedies, like Oedipus Rex, which were dealing with, themes of incest and hubris and divine retribution. The Roman theater had brutal violence, sometimes even had live executions in some of their spectacles, which I guess we're not really doing that anymore. But I think we've always seen shock, sometimes in the past it was kind of used as a moral lesson, or a catharsis, that kind of lined up with societal values of the time. I mean, you move ahead to like the morality plays of the medieval era, which, considering the conservatism of the audience of that time, were pretty shocking in terms of the explicit depiction of sin and punishment. And of course, some of Shakespeare's works. I mean, Titus Andronicus comes to mind, which had a lot of graphic violence, taboo relationships. That captivated and challenged audiences of the time. Um, these days it's a little bit different, I think, in terms of what we're using to shock people in that regard. I think like you could look at Tony Kushner's Angels in America, which was not perhaps meant to shock, but in terms of what it was depicting in terms of social taboos and things of that nature, you can look at that. Or probably more recently, slave play, which really looked at systemic oppression and things of that nature. Um, so we definitely have kind of in America, I think especially, we have this weird kind of dichotomy where visuals and language have become more explicit. But we also kind of have this countercurrent of offense, at certain things that are being shown in theater as well. I kind of think, these days when I see a theater piece that's perhaps more shocking or meant to shock in that regard, it's less about shocking people and maybe more these days about provoking certain dialogue, maybe raising awareness of something, advocating for a certain type of change. That's what I kind of see these days in pieces that that some would call shocking or taboos or something like that. I think of something like the vagina monologues, which, just as an aside, I got to see a production of that with my mother as part of the cast. The local university was doing it. She was on the faculty of the university and she got a part. So that's an interesting experience, I can tell you, from a theatrical perspective. But, that's it kind of leverages this discomfort to confront, social issues a little bit more. And I love some of these immersive theater experiences that we've seen happening lately, or non-traditional formats, that kind of hopefully jolt audiences out of some sense of complacency or something like that. So I guess I I think we're going to continue to see, or I hope we continue to see theater that challenges norms, that we can confront taboos with. I mean, we started this discussion today talking about, why do we have theater, or, what is theater for? And I do think beyond entertainment that this is a powerful thing that theater can represent, especially these days when we are just so saturated with the media, in terms of the bombardment we have. That to me is still the power of theater. It's live. It oftentimes can be visceral, that we can get these, unique moments, of shock as well. That being said, I think you have to be careful that you don't over rely on shock, or you can get a little bit, I guess gimmicky or something like that. I kind of think that if you do use shock, that it kind of has to line up with your narrative. It has to feel authentic and meaningful rather than gratuitous, especially with today's audiences being as sophisticated as they are. They're going to know when somebody is just trying to be shocking for shocking's sake. So that's kind of my thoughts on it, the terms of the history of it, and where I see it going from here. But Personally, I love, occasionally seeing a theatrical piece that will shock me in terms of what they are depicting on stage. And I sometimes like theater to make me feel uncomfortable. I don't think that's the worst thing in the world. And so, as much as I love a good comedy piece that'll make me laugh and make me feel good, there are times where I like a theater piece that challenges me and gets me to walk out of there confronting some things about myself, some things about my society. And I think that's a good way that we can use shock these days. But that's my opening salvo on it, at least. So
It it was funny when I was putting this question together. I thought back to when I was at school, how we did Ibsen's A Doll's House,
yep,
and that was banned when it originally came out. Productions of it were banned
yep,
because shock horror, a woman leaves her husband. So not just her
yeah,
husband, a woman leaves her husband and her children. And
right,
that's why it was banned. And you look at this as a someone in 2024 thinking, what? We kind of become desensitized to a lot of things. I think
absolutely,
that's where the temptation to keep pushing those boundaries comes from. You see it a lot in television. Things are getting, more graphic. You're seeing a lot more, violence and sex scenes than you used to, because people want to keep pushing that boundary. And it's not until someone goes, "Whoa, that's too far,"
right.
that they'll keep pushing the boundary. And I think the only thing stopping them at this point is the TV channels saying, "No, we can't have this unless it's after 9 o'clock," and then no, go nuts.
See,
Right.
I'll actually disagree in a sense. I think it's the violence and the sex has become more mainstream,
Mm,
but it's always been there. Like even before the MPAA ratings came out in what, the 60s, something like that.
Yeah.
Like there was that sort of thing. It was just in like underground low budget movies.
yeah.
Like I'm a big fan of Herschel Gordon Lewis, who is a horror filmmaker who, while at the same time as Hitchcock would show the knife and then the dead body, Herschel Gordon Lewis would show the knife penetrating the body to die. And like it was always so low budget and so terrible,
Yeah.
but like also very fun, at least from today's perspective.
Mm.
So, it's weird seeing a show on CBS showing nudity. And I'm like, whoa, whoa, not that I have any problem with it. But it was just like, I was like, oh, okay, that's different. It's a CBS. Like, that's so wild. Um, uh, so I think it's just become more like mainstream acceptable,
Yeah.
versus like straight to VHS.
Brent, I just wanted to like get behind what you were saying about like what is the purpose of the shock, right?
Right.
Like what are you seeking to accomplish with that moment? And I think what you were telling about your mother doing vagina monologues. First of all, I love your mother that she did vagina monologues. Like, way to go,
She was great in
mom.
it. Don't get me wrong.
Oh yeah, way to go, mom. Like, I love your mom.
Yeah.
But I think one of the things that's interesting about that is like, who in your audience are you seeking to shock as well? For example, like you had the extra layer of like, I'm not only watching a play completely about vaginas, but I'm also watching about my mother talk about vaginas and
Yeah.
talking about women's issues, right?
Yeah.
But what might be shocking to somebody in the audience who doesn't have that experience, to me as a woman, that was an incredibly cathartic show, and a show that was like, thank God we are finally talking about these things, right? Which I think is why Eve Ensler wanted to do that show, is like,
Yep.
we need to talk about women's bodies. We need to talk about things that affect women that nobody talks about because of shame and taboo. And so so I think one of the things that's interesting about that is the fact that when you present something that is intending to shock, how as playwrights do we craft that so that it is shocking in a way and to the people in the audience that we want to have that response, and being thoughtful about that. But completely agreeing with you, absolutely, of like, where am I placing this? Why am I placing it? How am I placing it? How am I crafting it so that it is not just getting lost in a sea of violence and gratuitous sex or whatever.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of that also speaks to the conversation around sexual violence on stage.
Mm-hmm.
Like, and in TV and film as well, and storytelling in general, is like, why and when do we need to see that? Do we ever need to see that?
But I think the important thing as well is to differentiate the idea of designed to shock versus designed to offend. Because if
Oh
you
yeah.
you bring in theatre that is designed to offend, all you are going to do is alienate your audience. And you see it a lot. You see shows that where people have gone, oh, how many people can I upset in one room?
Mm-hmm.
And you just think all the people are going to walk out with is feeling angry, or that's if they've stayed till the end at all. And I agree with you, Jamie. The year of creating theatres to shock is designed, in some cases, to inspire conversation. But if you just create something that's just designed to offend people without rhyme or reason, then, what's the point?
I think that rage is an amazing tool for writers, and it is for me. And specifically, as someone who has shifted their practice to focus in satire, that is all I am fueled by. Really, that's where I'm coming from, right? As a satirist, is there something in the world that is wrong and I don't like it, and so we're gonna make a comedy about it, right? We're gonna write about these horrible things, um, and I think that part of this conversation also is shock comedy, right? Is
Mm-hmm.
is because it's a very effective comedic device when used well, right? Like,
Yeah.
and I think comedy in general is such a potent and effective tool at addressing issues of for social reform, and like what you were saying, Brent, about like what is what is the shock seeking to accomplish, and advocating for change. And I think that comedy is such a wonderful way to approach that. And some of the work that I love the most is work that starts as a raucous comedy and slowly transitions into something deeper and darker. That is the work that I just like cannot get enough of, and the kind of work that I aspire to write. I haven't.
Mm-hmm.
I'm like on the hunt for it. Like, that is what I
Mm-hmm.
want to write.
There was a great play in Chicago with a theater called About Face Theater, and they're a queer theater in Chicago. And it was earlier this year, a play called Lavender Men, and it was about Abraham Lincoln having a gay affair with his law partner. And I mean, I think it's based very loosely in reality. Like, this could have been a thing. It might not have been a thing. It might have been a little bit of a thing. Um, but it's told from the perspective of a drag queen narrator, who plays everyone else. So Abraham Lincoln is one actor. The law partner is one actor, and then the drag performer plays everyone else. And like, she specifically says, "This is my story. Like, this is how I am going to explain what happened. So you could take it or don't." And it was like really fascinating. It was a really beautiful play and very
Mm-hmm.
intimate because it was just the three actors. And so like you learn something potentially new about Abraham Lincoln.
Excellent.
So I think sometimes when you're thinking about creating something that you think is going to shock, sometimes you do find yourself asking, do I need it? Does the story need it? Does the audience need it? And if they do, then don't apologize for it. I think there's nothing worse than having a play that kind of gets to the tipping point of wanting the audience to have that moment and then just backing away because they're scared someone might find it offensive or someone might get upset. I
Well, I
think
think,
that's the danger point as well.
yeah, I think also offense is relative as well,
Yeah.
right? It is coming back to, who is the audience for this piece. And because what some audiences will find offensive, other audiences will not. Who is seeing this and who is producing it? And I think I've been kind of thinking a bit about this idea of like designing to offend. And I don't think that just personally, like as a writer, I don't think that's in my DNA. I feel like if that's the purpose of the work, then I'm not serving the story necessarily. Um, then to me, that view ventures into potentially performance art almost. Um, uh, but that's just me reflecting on my own artistic practice, I guess. Um,
Yeah.
I think for me as a writer, the goal is not necessarily to offend. The goal is to serve the story with as much integrity as I can.
Yeah.
And yeah. And if that is based in truth, right? I think that offense also happens when something is not based in truth. I think that then it can be offensive.
Yeah.
That's what I like works to do too, is to confront me with stuff that I didn't know, not sit on my chest and scream in my face about it, but on the other hand, make me aware of it and then,
Mm.
make me confront it and then kind of make my own, conclusions and decisions from there. But
Mm.
that's my personal opinion when it comes to that kind of stuff. So,
Mhm.
I keep thinking about stuff that I've written, and the only thing that could come to mind that was was definitely shocking, but I was so proud of it. It was like the best thing I've ever written was I wrote one of the Golden Girls lost episodes, and I had a whole because I'm Jewish, and I don't think anyone in the cast was Jewish, but I had just a series of jokes about Sophia wanting to fuck Topol from Fiddler on the Roof, and they were definitely borderline anti-Semitic, but they were written by me. So does that make them anti-Semitic? But they're performed by someone who's not Jewish. And they were my favorite jokes. They were so inappropriate,
mhm.
and uh, and I know for the times I came to see the performance, like people loved those jokes. Like they were so stupid. And so I was always very proud that I was like, I don't know if I lose my Jew card for doing this. Um, but I wouldn't take it back, even today.
Ah, that's the thing. As playwrights, we are not designed to apologize
Right.
for what we write. This is our story, and if someone has chosen to take that story and bring it to life, that they saw something in that story that spoke to them. And if an audience member then comes and sees it and they get offended, it's not down to us as playwrights to apologize for that.
Hmm.
But Brent, your final thought.
I guess my final thought is that, the role of shock in theater is that I hope that playwrights are never in a position where they feel afraid to write any particular perspective or something like that, with the understanding that perhaps our objective is not to go out of our way to shock or offend unless there's a reason behind it why we're doing it. And so that's the thing, is that sometimes you have this interesting desensitization of especially in America here, with this interesting sort of counter conservative response to it, where it's like, oh, I'm offended by this. But I when I do dabble in comedy, I guess I'm not trying to go out of my way to offend people. But on the other hand, the stuff is out there. We live in the society that we do, and if we're going to make fun of stuff, it's there. And so it boils down to context and intent, which I think anything really does when we're writing what we write, to put on stage. So, but that's, I guess, my final thought on it.
Okay, we move to our final question. Who is the first person you think of when you think about the theatre world, and why? And we start with Jamie.
Oh, I'm first. So actually, the first person I think about is Beckett, because he was incredibly influential in my development as an artist. Like my entry into theater was musicals. I was in all of the musicals as a young person. I did show choir. I did all the things. And to me, theater was all about community, and theater was about belonging, and about joy, and doing fluffy musicals. And when I went to undergraduate for school and I discovered Beckett, the whole world of theater just opened up to me. The first thing that I was introduced to was his play Breath, where you have a pile of trash on stage and the lights come up and a baby cries and he breathes in, breathes out, and then there's a cry, and then it's blackout, and you're done. And that's a play. And I said, oh my God, that's a play? What? I had no idea that this was it just completely cracked my brain open and made me realize that theater could be so much more and could do so much more. And so that's the person who was really influential to me. So
okay, Brent.
Well, I'd like to say something like, Shakespeare or Neil Simon or something like that. But honestly, for me, it's Sondheim, because there is no Brent Alice Writes Theater if a high school Brent Alice hadn't seen West Side Story done by a local community theater. And I don't write musicals, but I thought I can write the story bits that I saw in there. But honestly, that and Into the Woods, that got me into theater, and from a musical perspective. But from there, of course, Shakespeare and everybody else, and Neil Simon and everybody else that I admired over the years came from that. But that's where I always say, and I don't necessarily write like Sondheim, but I have always admired him, and that's kind of my pat answer to that in terms of who got you into theater. It's Sondheim. So.
And finally, David.
I'm gonna go a bit more personal. I think of this guy Steve Billig. He was he and his wife Attell ran a theater company in the suburbs of Chicago, in Equity Theater, a small little Equity Theater near where I grew up. And I was 6 years old, and I auditioned for The King and I, and I sang "Old MacDonald Had a Farm," and he took me under his wing, and made me want to do theater and be involved in theater. And so I was thinking about that question. I was like, in fact, I almost said Adam Rapp, just because I love his plays. I think his plays are so beautiful. But I was like, the first person that came to mind was Steve Billig, because I wouldn't be doing theater if he hadn't been the director of The King and I when I was 6. So.
Yeah, we are out of time, guys. Thank you so much for being here for the very last episode of the Panel Presents.
Thank you, Rachel and David and Jamie. Pleasure to meet you. I look forward to reading and experiencing your work in the future. So that's what I love about this stuff, and being on NPX and stuff like that. Getting to read people's work is half the fun of what I do as a playwright. So it's very cool.
Thank you all so much for a wonderful conversation, diving into different things. It's just been a pleasure.
Yeah, thank you, Rachel, for inviting me onto this. And Jamie, I hope to see you on the streets of Chicago. And Brent, my brother's family lives in Grand Rapids, so I expect to see you at one of the local diners. And I also look forward to reading your guys' works and hopefully seeing productions of your works.
And that is it, not only for this episode, but for the Panel Presents in general. I hope you enjoyed my chat today with David, Brent and Jamie, as well as our monthly chats over the last 18 months. And remember, if there's an episode you've missed, then all of them are still available on all platforms to listen back to. Still to come on Theatrical Shenanigans though, we have 2 more episodes of our Law & Order series on the 8th and 15th of December, before we celebrate the end of the year with our Christmas special that contains not 1, not 2, but 12 short plays written by playwrights from all over the world. So make sure you join us for the 12 Plays of Christmas. I hope you can listen in again soon, but in the meantime though, I've been Rachel Feeney-Williams, this is Theatrical Shenanigans, bringing down the curtain and saying, I hope you can join us next time. Theatrical Shenanigans is part of an RFW Scripts production, found on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Podcasts and Podbean. Theme music is written and produced by Chris Cody.